Boo! Oh, did I get you? I gotcha. I know you couldn't see me, what with the camouflage, but, I couldn't resist a chance to really pull one over on you, my fantastic and lovely subscribers. Fun fact, even though I grew up in Pennsylvania, I've actually never owned a piece of camouflage clothing before, so yeah, this is actually pretty exciting for me. Thank you, Mother Mary, for decking me out in covert colors. Is it good for me? Is this a good look? I don't know. But that's neither here nor there. What you're here for, and what I'm here for, is another Jaguar review. And this time we're going to be talking about the lovely, the fantastic, the affordable Squier Classic Vibe 70s Jaguar. The Squier Classic Vibe 70s Jaguar features a polyester finish on a light poplar body, this one in the Guitar Center exclusive color Daphne Blue. The guitar has a 24-inch scale-length maple neck with a vintage tint poly finish, 22 frets, and a 9.5-inch radius on a bound, block-inlaid Indian Laurel fretboard. The headstock features Clouson-style tuners, a single string tree, and, well, the specs say a bone nut, and you know what? It's actually bone. As for the electronics, the guitar features two Fender-designed Alnico pickups, which have more output and throatier mid-range. The control scheme is the usual Jaguar fare, with switching between dual lead and rhythm circuits, as well as on-off switches for both pickups and the bass cut strangle switch. The Classic Vibe Jaguar wears a Mustang-style bridge and the same import vibrato that you find on other models in this price range. It has a push-in arm and lacks the trem lock button. Today's example wears Ernie Ball 11-48 power slinkies and is tuned to E standard. Now I should come right out of the gate and tell you that I'm a big fan of the Classic Vibe series. I've found them to be much improved over the previous Vintage Modified series, what with the tinted necks, the nicer sounding pickups, and the better build quality, at least in my experience. Now, even with my enthusiasm for the model, there are some sticking points that I absolutely will be mentioning, so do bear with me as I get through that. But first, a few things I loved. Among those things are the Daphne Blue finish, which I think is a lovely color overall. One of my favorite custom colors, in fact, so it's good to see it on an affordable model. Another is the tortoiseshell pickguard, which looks a lot better than they did on the Vintage Modified and previous series. This one has a depth and a swirliness to it that I really appreciate, especially for its price range. And we all know how hard it is to find good tort these days, especially in an affordable price range. So I'm pleased to see something that isn't, offensive to the eye right out of the box. Is it perfect? No. Is it close to the best tort I've ever seen? Not by a long shot. But it is visually attractive in a way that they have not been in quite some time. I would also like to point out that the CV Mustang style bridge is a vast improvement over the previous vintage modified threaded saddle bridge. As we've talked about previously, that bridge, like many others, is subject to intense rattle and buzz issues, and so the CV with its fixed screwless Mustang saddles, well, that's a step in the right direction. And for those of you looking for a guitar with a slim nut width, well, you'll be pleased to hear that the CV Jaguar is a bona fide member of the Skinny Nut Club with a nut width of 1 5/8. Skinny nuts! I had to do it. And aside from the nut width, I've got to admit that I really like the feel of this neck overall. It starts slim and increases in thickness a little bit up toward the 10th fret, but it never ends up filling your hand too much. It is certainly not a boat neck. I'll also mention that even with the binding, this is a pretty solid and comfortable C shape all the way up, so I'm very pleased. I also want to note that it's good to see full-size Jaguar knobs on import guitars. Generally, import guitars come with those super tiny, super sharp little Jaguar knobs that I find incredibly difficult to grip as I'm trying to do volume swells. This one feels great in my hand, and so, yeah, well done. Now, when we compare the Classic Vibe to the previous vintage modified series, one of the most improved aspects of the guitar, well, it's the pickups. You see, in the vintage modified series, the Duncan design pickups were kind of thin sounding. They were lacking in bass. They were not loud. They were prone to squeal and feedback, and overall just incredibly disappointing. So the new Fender Alnico pickups, well, they hit the spot. Overall, they're very full, they're very loud compared to the vintage modified, so that's a win in my book. Would I replace them? Yeah, I think so. I think if this were my guitar, I would still be putting something by Lawler or Novak or Creamery or Duncan Antiquity, any number of other options. However, your mileage may vary, so if you find yourself in love with the pickups, that's great. More power to you. Don't feel like you have to upgrade just because someone else said so.
2, 3, go!
The last thing that I want to mention as far as a vast improvement is actually the nut, but not because it was cut right. Now, There are some things about this particular guitar, which I believe came from Guitar Center to my friend Ryan, that lead me to believe that this guitar may not have been brand new. It may have been returned, it may have been a shop piece, I'm not sure. There are scratches on the pickguard, there are little indications that things have been tweaked or moved, and the nut, I know the specs say bone, and normally that means synthetic bone, but this is actual bone. I know this because I cut and shaved it down myself, and bone, if you've ever worked on it, has a very particular smell, one that is not replicated by tusk or synthetic bone or any of the other synthetic materials on the market. So this is a real bone nut, and it polished up like bone, it cut like bone, it sounds like bone to me. So if Squier is taking the time to actually cut real bone for their instruments, that is a giant improvement. I am not entirely convinced. I am happy to be wrong. I'm just a little shocked is all. Moving on. I'd like to point out that even though this guitar does indeed have the import electronics, you know, the tiny pots, the switches that from a visual inspection do not inspire too much confidence, everything works great. There have been no wiring faults like I encountered frequently on the vintage modifieds, and even the switches have a really pleasant click to them, which I don't remember having on my vintage modified before I replaced everything. So that seems like a huge improvement. So I have no doubt that the electronics are at least going to work as advertised and provide you with a pretty decent sound. You may improve that by putting American parts in there. That's always a good idea, but I didn't feel the need to change this right out of the gate as I usually do. Hey, can we talk for a second? Look, I know that I'm a jaded guitar tech and I don't expect much out of factory setups. But I was surprised on this model because of how bad it was. This factory setup was untenable. And if you watched my setup video from last week, which will reveal all for you, then you know what kind of work I had to put in to make this thing a viable guitar, especially for my friend who is learning to play. Those setup issues ranged from horribly cut nut slots, to too light string gauges, to a complete dried out fretboard, to the CV bridge. And I know I said I liked it, and I really, really do, but it has to be said that the fit of the height adjustment screws embedded in the posts, it's awful. Every time you strum this guitar, the bridge would continuously sink into the body from vibration. This guitar took so much work to turn it into a viable and usable instrument, and it's really disappointing to see this still be a problem even at the price point. Like, I know that a $400 or $500 guitar is not going to get the QC that it deserves, maybe not even the design, but this is fixable. This is such an easy thing to fix. I really think they should just be applying thread locker at the factory, and thread locker is the best way to fix this. As always, Loctite thread locker 242. It's the blue stuff. Just put a little bit of that stuff on the threads and you'll be in good shape. And now we come to an even bigger problem, and that is the vibrato. And no, it's not just because I think you're better off upgrading to an AVRI straight out of the box. It's not even that it feels all that bad, because, well, it works. But I have to say that I'm the reason that it works. This thing, when it first came in, was rattly, riddled with mechanical noises. It was horrible to behold. Anytime you use the vibrato, the arm would rock back and forth in its collet due to a poor fit, just like on the 60th anniversary Mexican Jazzmaster that I talked about previously on the channel. To fix this, I performed the hammer trick, as I so often do. And if you're not familiar, the hammer trick is just when you put the arm in a vise with about an inch of the inserted end sticking out of the teeth, and then you just whack it with a hammer. That puts a little bit of a bend in it that causes the arm to rub up against the collet and stops the rocking back and forth that was causing so much of the rattle. However, that was not the only cause of the rattle. The other cause of the rattle was internal slippage. Again, if you've watched the setup video from last week, then you've seen how I tackled this, but basically what was happening is that the malformed edges of the pivot plate, those two little legs, were allowing the string anchor to slip up and down as the vibrato is actuated, causing an immense amount of mechanical noise. And the only way to fix this was to grind them down to a much finer point so that they made contact with the string anchor plate in a much more positive manner. Now, you can go crazy. This thing doesn't slip around. So if you have a Classic Vibe or a Vintage Modified or any of the models that come with the unbranded trem lockless vibrato, the best thing you can do, well, if you don't want to deal with the headache, it's replace it with an AVRI vibrato, an American Vintage reissue. If you want to stick with this vibrato, you don't want to spend extra money, and the vibrato is giving you some super harsh vibes, man, you gotta do the grind. That is a disappointing thing. However, do I think they all have this issue? I don't know. I haven't played them all. Yours might not need this work, but I've seen enough of them to know that some of them absolutely do need this extra work. And if that's the case with your own, I'd like to refer you to last week's setup and repair video on this very guitar for more information. Link in the description down below. So, do I actually recommend this guitar? Yes, I do, because it's affordable, it's fun, and for those of you who are interested in getting your first offset guitar, or you want to back up but you don't want to spend American money, this is great. So yes, I recommend, but let's be real, this is a good guitar with some bad parts on it. You may potentially have issues with this import hardware right out of the box, because that stuff just isn't made to last, and it isn't made very well to begin with. It's made to be affordable, and that often means cutting corners. Even with that, the CV Jag has a great sound, it has a great tone, and it has a great look. I get serious Roland S. Howard vibes from this thing every time I look at it, and it makes me wish it were white, and it makes me wish that I were as good as Roland S. Howard. So I'm getting those vibes. I'm getting war paint vibes. I'm getting all the good vibes from this guitar, and I think that you will too. So for those of you who are curious about offset guitars and maybe don't know where to start, try the CVs. See if they work for you. I think they're really good for the money. So do take all of that with a grain of salt. Consider my words, heed my warnings, and may the odds be ever in your favor. I do hope this review has been informative and helpful, especially for those of you looking at the CV Jaguar as a possible buy. Pretty good for the money. Got a couple problems. That's what I think, but I'd love to hear what you think down in the comments. Thank you so much for coming back to the channel again and again, for liking, for sharing, for commenting, for subscribing. It sure does make me a very happy Mike. In the meantime, I hope that you're staying safe out there. I hope that you're taking care of yourself and each other, and we'll see you in the next video.